Hello, hello. It's Meg Slay and Trev Lewis, and we're back with another episode of Solidarity Side Chats. How are you doing this week, Trev?
Indeed, we are. I'm doing fine, all things considered. How are you?
Good. Yeah, all things considered. I mean, we've definitely had a lot of doom scrolling this week, haven't we?
Yeah. This is our first recording since everything that is happening in Gaza, and we kind of talked about it behind the scenes with each other, and realized that it's in this middle area where it's weird and wrong if we don't acknowledge that it's happening, because it's just like the only thing I've been able to really read about and focus since it started.
It's that and Taylor Swift.
Yeah, exactly. And the contrast between those two things. But also at the same time, like, there's really nothing we can give you that you can't get from people who are way smarter and way better experts on the topic. And so it's like, we did want to acknowledge, like, we care about this. We are reading about it every day. Me especially. I'm constantly looking at the photos and the videos that are coming out of there. It's horrific. It's going to go down as one of the most brutal, evil, ugly things in all of history. And our government is fully supporting it 110%. It's unforgivable. It's inexcusable. And I every day I wake up and I check the news, and it's equally as evil and awful. And it seems like I'm at least glad that some people in the media with some visibility are finally starting to push back on our country's stance on this, including one of the people we're going to talk about this episode, Jon Stewart. He's going to come up later in the episode, signed a list with a bunch of artists calling for a ceasefire over there. And if you have any decency or humanity whatsoever, you would recognize that a ceasefire is the bare minimum of what needs to happen. Yeah, I mean, it's not a war if one side is in a giant concentration camp and the other side has a military and is just carpet bombing them. That's not a war to me. A war is like when both sides have like
equal power,
or at least comparable, or at least like, and it's not that. And so anyway, again, you know all of this most likely if you're watching, and there's nothing else we could tell you that you don't know. And you can do the same. I'm sure you're doing the same doom scrolling that we're doing. So
we just want
it is
to
what it
acknowledge
is.
what's going on, and
and
just
that
say that we know, and
and that America is evil in many ways, and that's just the reality. I mean, at this point, I have love for the people of this country, and it's my home, and obviously, at the end of the day, I want what's best for all of us, but I also recognize that this isn't best for anyone, and the people in charge of this country are not. It's not even that they're not doing the right thing, it's that they're doing all of the wrong things, completely the opposite of what should be doing. So that's that, Meg. I don't know if you have any like other thing to add there, or if we could just sort of proceed with something that's related to this.
You know what? I just wanted to say that when you were talking about that and like, oh yeah, like this is what's going on with America and everything, it reminded me of the phrase that you used to describe what's going on with Solidarity Media, which is people who care about you talking about the things that you care about.
That's right.
So that came to mind. And then you were also talking about the perfect segue into our next topic as well, right? Which is a movie that I haven't heard. I only heard it yesterday from you, but then it popped on my social media, of course, because Zuckerberg's listening to everyone or whatever.
Of course.
But what's this movie about? What is the movie?
I'm trying to adjust my microphone. There's a shadow on my neck that's driving me crazy.
I know. I got that too.
It's like, so lighting is the hardest part for those of you out there who have never done streaming or anything like it. Like, lighting is the worst aspect of it. And
100%.
if you have elements of OCD and ADHD and anything like I do, it's just a nightmare. And that's why I've announced various.
No, I feel that.
Various projects over the year.
Do you remember when I was doing this and I was like, why is my face so washed out all the time? And it's because my laptop, like the light's on full blast. The screen. Yeah. So anyways, let's go back to the topic.
Anyway, folks, if there's shadows on my face, we're figuring it out.
You're
one day,
beautiful.
one of these
You're
days.
handsome, Trev. Don't worry about it.
Thank you. So yeah, I saw Killers of the Flower Moon last night, and It has a limited release, so if you haven't seen it and you really want to, obviously go do that. I highly recommend it. It is one of the greatest movies ever, I think, really. And even though I haven't seen, I'm not like a film expert, but I feel safe saying that. It's Martin Scorsese. He's obviously one of, if not the best director alive. I think that's safe to say. A lot of people feel that way, and rightly so. This movie actually ties into what's going on in the world right now, because it is about the Osage people in America in the between 1910 and 1930s, the murder of these people who struck it rich with oil on their land. And if you know anything, which I hope most of you, if not all of you, do about Native Americans and the history of the United States, etc., it's a timely film, although I'm sure when they were making it, they had no idea what would be transpiring across the world right now. But when we're talking about indigenous people, when we're talking about human rights and land rights and these sorts of things, it is a dramatic parallel, the foundation of this country and what is currently happening over there with the settlers in Palestine. So it's a great movie. I will tell you, I mean, if you're faint of heart, if you get queasy very easily, it is a really dark film, and I appreciated that decision. You know, if you're familiar with Scorsese's work at all, Wolf of Wall Street, Goodfellas, Casino, he very frequently visits the topic of like completely horrible, awful men that are basically thugs and are the ones with most of the power and in charge of things and have all the money. That's like a recurring theme, whether you're talking about mobsters or Wall Street, or in this case, what these people did to the Osage folks. It's a recurring theme in different time periods and different settings. But the difference with this movie and the other ones, really, if you've seen all of them, is he really strips away almost any of the glamour, any of the glitz, any of the like. I mean, there are still some really visually stunning moments, and there's still some great music and all that, but it is one of the quietest things I have ever seen, ever. Like it's almost like disturbingly quiet. And
really,
the audience.
Why do you think that artistic decision works, or why he did that?
I think he did it because like you really don't want this story to be. Obviously you want a movie to be entertaining, but you don't want to make light of it in any way because it's so brutal and it is so dark and it is so evil. And so I really felt like he did this movie in a way that captures exactly that tone. And there are laughs in it, although at least with the audience that we were sitting with, it was almost like they were laughing at times because they didn't know what else to do. It's almost like that
like
kind of that kind of laughter where you're just uncomfortable. You don't know how else to like. Did he actually say that? Did they actually just do that? It is so the
heavy
brutality. The brutality is
crazy.
So cavalier. And one of the things that I like about this story being told and the way this film captures it is, I think when we all grow up and we learn about the history of the struggle of the Native Americans and what the settlers did to them, there's this idea that the reason they lost is because of some sort of primitiveness. Like we were more advanced and sophisticated and we had all these guns, and that's, you know, they were quote unquote conquered. And if you talk to any like horrible racist human being, that's usually one of the points they make. Well, it's because we're the winners and they were the losers, and if they had been
right or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if they had been smarter and better, they would have done it to us. And it's like, no, that's actually not what happened. What happened is there were people living here and they were peaceful relatively, and they welcomed you in, and our ancestors' response to that was to take advantage of that and treat them horrifically and steal all of their stuff. I mean, that's just, you won because the other side wasn't trying to fight.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, to my understanding of like in a lot of Native American cultures is that they understand like how everything is interconnected. You know, like between people and the planet and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And when I think about, you know, European culture, Western culture, in general, I think about the Great Chain of Being, which is a religious artwork that has like God at the top, and then it goes like all the way down from like archangels, angels, you know, humans, animals, like plants, and then minerals and stuff like that. So it's really interesting if you look into the history of it. But what it was is that like everyone like got into that mentality where it's like, oh, this is like the hierarchy of life, right? Like this is how everything is. So that's also why people think like, hey, we can just go and exploit the planet because, you know, plant life is beneath us, right? Animal life is beneath us. It doesn't matter. And then if you actually look at like how racism as a system started, it was also influenced by that because you had like the I'm forgetting the term, but like the scientists of that era, they were kind of just like, oh, well, like, you know, everything's in a hierarchy. So is there like a hierarchy within humanity? Like, because we all have these different appearances. And that was just like them thinking that in the back in the days, like they didn't know, like, you know, and then of course there's people that were in power, they exploited that. And so, with this movie, like, does it touch, like, what issues does it touch on? I know, like, about, like, you know, indigenous rights and everything, I'm assuming. But, like, does it talk about power dynamics or, like, how wealth might play a role in that?
Yeah, so to the point you were discussing, and I was sort of getting at, is that the way it depicts, well, first of all, it's based on a book, and the book is based on reality. The book has the same title, Killers of the Flower Moon. So when we talk about what's in the movie, keep in mind we're talking about a real story that really happened, and so obviously there are creative decisions being made, but it's not fiction. Okay, so there's that. But what is very accurately captured is that the white Americans that are doing this, they're actually not clever. In fact, many of them are quite stupid. So they didn't win because of any kind of like ingeniousness or cleverness or sophistication or organization. It's just they're thugs. Like they were really dumb thugs that had a lack of conscience. That really is what allowed them to do what they did, to just kill whoever for whatever reason. And so I don't want to spoil too much of the movie, but that's really one of the main takeaways was wow, these people were just actually violent. There's nothing else to it. And I think if you see the movie for yourselves, that's something you'll walk away with, was there was really no elaborate anything. There's no, which actually makes the movie easy to follow in the intellectual sense, because there's nothing really higher going on the side of the aggressor. So there's that. The other side of it is, yes, the way it portrays the Osage people and their culture and their spirituality. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but there's one really, really particularly incredible scene of when one of the characters, there's many characters that pass away in this film, so obviously, but when one of the characters is passing on, like there's a really spiritual, incredible scene. And again, it's one of the scenes in the film that's just pure silence when it happens. So the visuals are really stunning and powerful, and then the whole theater is just mute, and it adds so much to it. Again, I'm not like a film expert, but I can't think of the last time where a movie so effectively used no sound, as powerfully as music. Like not even music. Like there's moments in this film that don't even have anything going on, like nothing, and that stillness is more powerful than any song, any orchestration, any composition could have been in that moment, and it's so genius. And I am going to see it a second time, this time in Dolby Atmos, because of the sound. I want to really hear it in the different sounds. And I'm
only laughing because I'm thinking about that one. What was it? Oppenheimer.
What I saw 3 times.
Yeah, like it was like insane. I was like, again.
My hyper fixation. Those of you know what that is.
Yeah,
you understand. When I'm not a film expert, I don't watch a ton of movies, but when I find one I like, I make it my whole personality, and I drive everybody crazy about it, and that's that. But yeah, I mean, even though it's about a specific story and a specific set of murders, you can apply this film to the very foundation, the very origins of the country that we currently live in. And what's really interesting, and I put this sort of in my head, is think about the time period that this happens. Another Leonardo DiCaprio film, Great Gatsby. So if you go see this movie, keep in mind it's the same time period, the Roaring 20s. So while the Roaring 20s is happening and Wall Street and the Gatsby folks are obviously Gatsby's fiction, but you know that time period's happening. So are these Osage murders and the formation of the FBI and all that stuff in this rural kind of like the juxtaposition of what's all happening in this country. Two polar kind of different ends, I think, of like the glamour of Wall Street folks and the financial thugs in their own way versus these people. But anyway. I don't know that there's more to say to it than that if without spoiling anything. And I always like to do these videos that we do together in a way because every YouTube channel does spoilers and they just go into depth. And I think it's one of the darkest, most brutal, most honest things. And there's also a scene towards the end, which I won't, again, give too many details, where you realize that the movie is also very self-aware. And it actually adds a very brief comment on the existence of this film and the audience, and then even Martin Scorsese, because he's the director of the film, like his sort of role, the role of a director and cinema and entertainment in how these people have been treated throughout history, because it's certainly not the first movie or media to touch on the conflict between Native Americans and white people, right? Like there's tons of movies and books and stuff written on that, and that's a whole other layer of like, not only did this happen to these people, but then many times over we've turned it into mere stories to consume. And I do think it has, intentional or otherwise, some relevance to, for those of you who listen to other like podcasts and stuff, like the number one genre in podcasts right now is true crime. And there's been a lot of discussion on, is that okay? Like, is it normal that the number one genre of an entire medium of entertainment is like real stories about people just being killed, and that it's just something, you know, I've never made like a really dogmatic judgment about like anyone who's really into true crime or anything, because I think there are just certain things about it that are naturally fascinating, and if you're interested in like the detective side of it and just sort of like figuring out, like solving a mystery kind of thing, I think there's a place for that. But I do think, and especially this particular scene in this film caused me to really reflect on, is there something darker to that? Is there something darker about how this country, which was founded on just like violence and murder and sustains itself with constant violence and murder and is fueling violence and murder overseas right now, and the number one form of entertainment, at least in the podcast sector, is about violence and murder.
I'm like, you're getting very like philosophical right now, you know, for me, because I'm just like thinking, I'm like, you know, like, because I'm thinking about, because you're saying, you know, there is violence in this, and like, you know, I can handle some, you know, I saw Game of Thrones, like, you know, and I'm thinking about 1883. There's some violence in that, you know, and but for me, it's like I don't really enjoy watching that kind of stuff, like the horror movies that are constantly like super gory and everything. I'm like, you know, I need to be in the right mindset. And so when you're talking about like true crime, because I don't listen to that. You know, I mean, I might catch like a episode on a TV show here and there, but I don't really like to surround myself with that kind of energy, because I'm just like, it's too dark for me. And it's like, I already know it exists, you know. I feel like that, like when you put yourself into that too much, like it's just such a heavy burden to put on your soul all the time. And, you know, I think that like with this movie, you know, you're talking about it, like the way that it portrays a lot of this stuff. I think it's really interesting, and like I'd be more inclined to go and see it because of that. But I mean, I probably wouldn't watch it twice like you, because you know, if it's so heavy in that sense, that would just be hard for my heart, you know.
It's heavy. I will say it doesn't focus too much on like blood and stuff like that, so that kind of gore, although there are certainly moments and you'll see it, but it doesn't focus on that. That would be almost weird if it kind of like had a fetish for the actual blood. So that's good that he didn't do that. But it is spiritually very heavy. It is very heavy, and you do if you saw Oppenheimer, it is almost the opposite in tone. Like Oppenheimer, the reason I love that movie is because it was like an action. Christopher Nolan took this biopic and turned it into like well, not really a biopic, but he took this historical movie that could have been really boring, and some people will still say it is, but he really made it feel like it was paced and loud and flashy, like an action movie. And Scorsese's fully capable of doing that, and has made very flashy, but this story, he decided, you know what, we're just going to make this really quiet and heavy and dark and honest and as real as possible, like as real as you can get for a movie, without turning it into something that's like too depressing or horrific, so it's still entertaining, but it's like as close as you can get in entertainment to something that's just that real. And you walk out of the theater if you watch it. And you know what? We had a moment for our specific showing, and this will be my last sort of meta commentary on this film before we move on to something troubling that is tangentially related to the film, and which is the company that produced it. But before, one last little meta commentary I had is the audience of the film that we watched it with. I'm sure there have been worse audiences, but when a movie is this quiet, you cannot help but notice any noise and any stupidity going on with the people around you. And there's some people who really it is 3.5 hours, but we all binge watch TV shows. Like some people I could tell really struggled to sit still, and some people were like whispering amongst themselves, which is fine if you're really enjoying the movie. I get it. And then at one point in the latter half of the film, you hear a guy in the back row of our theater just snoring. And then once the film ends, I believe it was that same guy. Like, I'm sure somebody woke him up because it was again. This is a loud, quiet movie, so everybody can hear this a-hole snoring in the back. Yeah. And so I'm sure somebody really nudged him and told him to wake the F up. When the film ends, that guy, and I'm assuming whoever tried to wake him up, almost got in like a fight, and they start cussing at each other, and like he's like, "You want to go, man? Let's do this." And I'm like, this is such a perfect commentary on what this film really just portrayed, which is we are the descendants. He was asleep for it. The stupid American fell asleep during the movie that's just like really brutal and honest about the foundation of his country. And then what does he do? What is the American fight? He tries to start a fight and resorts to violence and is just a stupid, dumb thug. And I'm like, wow, this movie just showed the origins of what's happening in the back row. Like, this movie showed you the origins of the people that we have become today. And what more poetic way to end this than some dumb white American in the back row
trying to start a fight.
Wow, there we go.
Like,
so that was that.
You know what? Can I just say that too? Like, okay. Why is there this mentality that's like, hey, I can just like fight my way out of a problem? Like, and then this is the thing that gets me. So many of those people are the same people that are like, I'm super logical, I'm a free thinker. And it's like, okay, well, if you're such a thinker, if you're so logical, then why can't you figure out a solution that doesn't involve violence?
Right.
If you're really so like brilliant, figure out a solution that doesn't involve throwing fists. Like, get with it. Like, if you go back to the ancient Greeks and everything, it's like, why are we like different from the animals? Like, because we have reason, like, because we can actually think. So why not use your brains to actually think through problems and talk things out and whatever? And I guess that comes back to like, just like, systematic, oppressions in general. So we got a lot to address in that, but we're not going to get into it.
I have this long running theory as far as animals not having reason. I have this long running theory that secretly animals are actually smarter than us. And the reason they don't talk and the reason they didn't build like advanced civilizations is because they're smart enough to know that this shit sucks.
If I just like evolve to be cute, these humans will take care of me.
Exactly. The cats are the smartest of anybody. Like they knew.
Because I was like thinking, I want to be reincarnated as a dog. Like, like I mean, like a golden retriever of a really wealthy family. Like that sounds like dope.
Although if I was reincarnated as a dog, when we think about that, we think of like a middle class golden retriever. But my luck is I would be reincarnated as like one of those dogs that gets beaten by their owner and thrown in a garbage can, like with like flies buzzing around my head and like
like in the like eyes of an cage. Angel, like or the arms of an angel commercial, like Sarah McLachlan.
I would be one of the ones in the Sarah McLachlan commercial.
Like, yeah, I know, right? That's 1,000%. Like that's also a concern for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Anyway, so that's the movie. There you go. There's that review for you. Go watch it. If you need to go see it this week because it's a limited release because of Apple. Apple is the company that actually funded, or at least mostly funded, and released this film. It's one of the first films released under their sort of banner. And so they're just doing a limited release, and then they're putting it on their streaming platform, which brings us to the other big story that we happen to notice this week is Jon Stewart has walked away from his show, The Problem with Jon Stewart, which was also an Apple production and was on the same streaming service that this film is actually going to join. Jon Stewart has walked away from his show, The Problem with Apple TV Plus, because allegedly there was disagreement between the company and him on some of the topics that were going to be discussed for season 3. Specifically, what has been mentioned so far is the topics of AI and China. And so that's all we know. I don't think Jon Stewart, from what I've read and seen, he probably can't publicly come out and say exactly what happened. Apple has refused to comment on the situation, but that much we do know is fact. And I will say this. Jon Stewart has not had the best takes on some things, particularly China, in recent years. And so, weirdly, I feel like if those segments were to have aired, there's a non-zero chance I actually would side with Apple, not for the same reasons.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna get into why Apple doesn't want this to happen, but the sort of Wuhan lab theory during COVID and like some stuff that was thoroughly debunked and racially motivated. He went on Stephen Colbert during the height of all that, and Colbert was actually the one to kind of tell him like, well, that's not really what it. Yeah, Colbert was actually trying to calm him down, which was weird because you would, if anybody watches both of these dudes at this point, Jon Stewart seems clearly more to the left of Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert is now a very standard, just sort of middle of the road liberal. Jon Stewart has some pretty based takes on like capitalism and America, and even on this Apple TV show. And he's gone to like the Treasury and like confronted these people, and I have no doubt that he'll continue to do like something really amazing in a different capacity, or maybe just as a podcast or some other streaming platform.
He can always join Solidarity Media.
He could, you know what? He could come join Solidarity Media, and we'll still be the flagship show. Sorry, John, you can be second fiddle, and I think he'd be very good at second fiddle. But no, you know what's interesting is Conan went to HBO Max, and a part of me thinks if Jon Stewart's going to go anywhere. And if they release him from his like non-compete, whatever, he might go to like a Max original. I could see him doing that because I don't think HBO Max, which is now owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, I don't think they have as much stake in these topics, and they're more traditional entertainment media companies. They're still conglomerates, but that's kind of the issue. So what I mean to say is, even though I feel like Jon Stewart doesn't have the smartest takes when it comes to China, and I'm personally much more critical of how our media portrays China because a lot of it's Cold War propaganda, and if you can't see that by now, it is time to wake up. The same people accusing other places of constant human rights atrocities and totalitarianism are the ones that are backing Israel right now. Yeah. So just keep in mind that the State Department and CNN and your mainstream media sources, these people who are now championing Israel are the same ones constantly accusing other places of human rights violations. Now, does that necessarily mean everything they publish is false? No. But I do think you need to be more critical about the bias in your media when it comes to foreign policy, and even places that you've been programmed your entire life to stand against. The picture might be more nuanced than what you've been sold. So even in spite of the fact that I think Jon Stewart doesn't have the best takes on specifically the issue of China sometimes, and he kind of is just standard mainstream media when it comes to that issue specifically, I'm still very scared of the idea of a corporation like Apple telling entertainers like Jon Stewart what they are allowed to say.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously the notion of free speech and media in this country has always been not really free in the way that it's said. I mean, look at how many journalists on TV right now are showing you the truth about Palestine. In mainstream media, you're going to be hard pressed to find it.
Like the mainstream media does not tell you the whole story, and just like how you're saying, like, question the propaganda that we're always seeing in the media, especially when it comes to international relations. Like, that's 100% true. Like, the whole thing is that there's this one quote, and I'm forgetting the woman who said this, but she essentially said, I have more in common with a civilian that's living in Iran than I do with my own government. And that's the same for all of us. And every citizen in every nation, we have more in common with each other than we do with the people that are ruling our countries.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something to think about when we're talking about international stuff, because we're going to have, when we're talking about Palestine and Israel, we have more in common with those citizens than we do with our own governments, and and that's the same goes for them, I'm sure, and that's the thing that nobody, no mainstream media is going to go and highlight that,
No.
because there always needs to be a villain in their stories, and that in and of itself is not logical, because this is kind of for me, when I thought about solidarity media and everything, that's why I'm just let's be curiosity driven and solution focused, because there's always going to be questions that we have, and we're always going to have problems that we need to figure out. And so let's go about them logically. So when you're talking about Jon Stewart, kind of, I guess he got really upset about COVID, and then his takes on China, it's just okay, John, if you want to talk about China, then let's go about it logically. What is your question? Let's approach this the scientific theory. Let's go through the motions and figure things out and do a lot of research. Let's not just go and give hot takes all willy-nilly,
Yeah. And I'll defend him a little bit. With that Colbert appearance, I think he was just in the moment trying to be funny. And sometimes when you're a comedian and you're just trying to be funny,
you go and approach that line, you're like, am I going to cross it?
It's a hard line, and sometimes you don't really know what you're talking about. You're just trying to get a laugh. And I'll say 90% of the time, I still think Jon Stewart is on the right side of things. Yes. And I look to him as a huge inspiration for my own, any media career that I ever have and have, he was a huge inspiration. And back when I was a young Republican, Jon Stewart was one of the first, which is part of my origin story.
I'm just I don't think I've ever heard that. That's something we need to unpack.
Yeah, part of my origin story, then where I grew up. Jon Stewart was one of the first people to get me out of that hellhole, mental hellhole of right-wing nonsense, because he was funny. So there's a power to that. Yeah. But, you don't always have the right take. But the thing go ahead.
I just want to say this really quick, too, is just I think you're saying this, even though he might not have, a view that aligns with your own, you still are able to go and acknowledge hey, at the end of the day, I see more eye to eye with him than I do differences.
Value. Yeah, exactly.
You're still you know what? I could still organize with this guy, even though we don't agree on this. We just won't organize on this stuff. And that's something that I see lacking a lot on leftist online spaces. Because
Very
it's
true.
Just just because somebody has one take that's different than you doesn't make them a bad person.
Absolutely.
You can still organize with them on the 98% of the other issues that you guys agree with, right? And that's how we build power, is just being okay, let's just build power on the issues that we agree on. So just something to think about,
and
whoever's
in the
watching
context of, even though I have some doubts on whether I would have agreed with this segment that didn't get to air, what's the greater danger here? Because the thing about it is now Apple, a giant corporation, is telling an entertainer that he's not allowed to talk about a topic because it might hurt their shareholder value. And I want people to understand that even though the media has always been corrupt and it's always been quote unquote authoritarian in its own way. It's never been truly free. And you can go back to the Iraq War and see how journalists were shunned from talking about that, or the Palestine right now, and all the way back stretching to Vietnam, etc. The media has always been under pressure from the ruling class to not actually tell you the truth, even if they want to. And even when they want to, that's a rare circumstance. But when they do want to, they still can't because of pressure. But what's different about this, what is a distinguished thing about this story, is a corporation like Apple and corporations like Amazon are increasingly taking over entertainment in a way that, like, entertainment used to be run by the mafia and the mobs and vaudeville and all that stuff, and then it became taken over by corporations like Comcast and GE and these sorts of things. But it was still within the realm of like cable companies and broadcast networks and these sorts of things. And now everything's getting so consolidated to the point that corporations like Amazon and Apple, which do so many different things, but they're primarily tech. Apple primarily sells computers and phones and all that and software, and Amazon sells everything. Like it's a tech company, and these companies that have a lot more at stake and have a lot more conflicting interests, these gigantic corporate mega conglomerates, are now controlling more and more of your TV and your movies. And there's been rumors that Bob Iger is preparing to sell Disney to Apple. Now, whether that's, and the rumors are not like completely outlandish. These are the people I've seen discuss this are people who are pretty level-headed and know what's going on. If there's any truth at all to that, the idea that Disney gets absorbed by Apple, like we're talking about conglomerates on top of conglomerates on top of one giant mega corporate, like a corporation that's more powerful than most governments, even they already are. It's really terrifying. And so I want to make that clear. While I don't know about these specific segments would have thrilled me, my takeaway from this story is you guys got to realize we really got to help fund independent media like ours, or maybe you hate us and that's fine. Go fund some other independent media. But we have got to move away from allowing increasingly large and increasingly unchallenged corporations from controlling media and entertainment, because the day is going to come where there's like 2 corporations left, and then there's 1 corporation left, and then we're a technocratic.
And they're called the Democrats and Republicans. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, it all merges together into one like Frankenstein quasi-private, public, technocratic, fascist corporate state, and that's kind of the end game of capitalism in a way, and that's. So we need to fight that, and the way we fight that is independent coverage. The people on the ground in Gaza, the people who are related to them overseas, sharing their updates, which as messy as X/Twitter is now, I've still managed to get a bunch of it in my feed. And if I wasn't seeing the videos and images I'm seeing on the internet from Gaza, from the Palestinian perspective, we wouldn't be seeing it anywhere. And so that's the value of what independent media brings. That's why Meg started this company. That's why I agreed to join her. That's why we do this. Eventually what we do is going to be bigger and even more bold than what we're doing now. But I do hope the folks out there appreciate, at the very least, that exactly because of stories like this is why we're doing what we're doing right now. And so if you feel like supporting us, please do. That actually just about wraps it up for this episode, Meg, but I want to give you a chance to offer your final thoughts before we head out.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I just every time like you just like go and talk, I'm just like such a like active listener to you, because I'm just like, you're fascinating, like I love the way that you bring things together. So you honestly just did everything justice. All I would say that if you do feel like going and supporting us, you can go to patreon.com/solidaritymedia. We have a couple different tiers. It really helps us out because, unfortunately, within a capitalist system, we all have bills to pay. So, we have business expenses to go and cover. So, even if it's just like $1 to $5 a month, whatever, that really does make a huge difference for us. And that's kind of almost like buying me or Trev like a beer, so think of it like that, but it's going to covering the essentials to actually run this and help grow this, so we can actually create a network where we can actually have a lot of different podcasts, catering to different types of people and sharing the things that mainstream media doesn't, because that's really what's missing from the narrative nowadays, is the truth and the whole picture, because if you're only seeing one side of things, you're not seeing the whole picture. In addition to that, we are going to be starting a Substack for Solidarity Media, which is essentially just a platform for newsletters and everything. And we're going to be doing them weekly. It's going to kind of be a mix of different things, just like how to get involved in your community and, just like learning different lessons from activists and really intelligent, smart people. And I would definitely recommend going and subscribing to that. You can do it at, I think it's solidaritymedia.substack.com/subscribe. You can sign up that way. That's all I have to say. So, Trev?
Until next time, everyone,
Yes.
We will see you, and stay safe, stay aware.
Stay kind.
Be kind, take care of yourselves, but don't tune out completely, because we got to build a better world.
Yes.